Guten Morgen, es ist für mich immer ein großes Vergnügen, hier in Wien eine Vorlesung zu halten. Das erste Mal, fast vor 50 Jahren, dass ich in Wien war. So, und gleich dann mehrere Mal. Leider ist mein Deutsch nicht so gut aus meiner Erinnerungen. Deshalb musste ich meine Vorlesung auf Englisch halten. Ich hätte immer lieber klug auf Englisch statt dumm auf Deutsch. So I came here the first time almost 50 years ago. I was a student. 40 years ago, I was a scientist out at the Sept International Institute for Applied Statistics Analysis. And at that time, I had just completed a study, which I showed here in Vienna. And a main result of that was a computer model showing some aspects of history from 1900 up until 2100. All of these slides will be given to you, so don't spend any time writing down. Notice, in 1972, there was still a very long period of growth ahead. And of course, we've seen that in Austria. I remember the difference in Lebensstandard from the 70s till now in Austria. Amazing. But now, that period is coming to an end, and we're here. And just ahead lies this period where population, industry, and resource and energy use will start to go down. I'm sure that will happen. Will it also bring down democracy? This, of course, is the interesting question. And I tell you that the answer isn't yet clear. Maybe yes, maybe no. But in order for the answer to be no, we are going to have to change our habits, the way we think about our goals and our society. And just now I'm going to give you practice changing your habits. Cross your arms. Look down and see which wrist is on top. So it's that one for me. Drop your arms. Now, please cross your arms. Look down and see which wrist is on top. Okay. Now we do a scientific study. Everyone who had the same wrist up both times, raise your hand. So almost everybody. Everyone who had the left wrist up both times, raise your hand. Everyone who had the right wrist up both times, raise your hand. That's interesting, half and half. So you always do it the same way, but half do it one and half do it the other. It's a habit, of course. A habit is a behavior that you use automatically when you want to think about something else. And when you want to do something which doesn't need your arms, you have to get your arms out of the way, so you cross them, left or right. And it works great. Democracy has worked great. Prof has worked great. And we have developed many habits to promote them over the last 50 years. But sometimes conditions change, and then you have to change your habits. Cross your arm the other way. Good. Most of you managed. But this shows us three things about changing habits. Number one, it is possible Number two, it's not easy. You have to think about it. And probably you make mistakes at first. Number three, it doesn't feel so comfortable, so I'm going to aim to do it the other way. We can keep democracy, but we're going to have to change our habits about growth. It won't be easy. We will make mistakes. And many people are going to be uncomfortable. But it's possible. So before I get into my remarks, which will be pretty short here, I want to make 5 points. So first, when I say growth, and I think generally today, when we say growth, we mean physical growth, material expansion in the use of energy, materials, and population. We don't mean development. So, when you have a child, in the early years, you are very happy to see growth. If your little kid becomes bigger and bigger, you are very proud. But finally, at about the age of 15 or 18, you want the physical growth to stop and the development to start. More languages, better self-understanding, better capacity for friendship and love, and so forth. Our society now needs to move from growth to development. Development, I think, is possible for a very long time. Absolutely, it's possible to promote development through democracy. But for the moment, we are fixed on physical growth, and that is what I'm talking about today. The second point, I'm going to give you all the slides. They come from the organizers. So everything that I'm speaking, that I show you, you will get it. So don't bother to write me. Number three, if you don't hear me, please raise your hand, and then I will speak louder. Number four, I'm sad to say I have to leave in the middle of this symposium. Some emergency came up for me, and so after my speech I'm going to leave, and then I come back at the break in the afternoon, and then I will be here for the panel. I'm very sad because I know Helga and the other speakers have some very interesting ideas which would be useful to me, but I have to miss them today. And the fifth thing, just to say that, of course, I'm not going to give you an answer to the question asked for this symposium. Okay. When you look at this picture, you imagine that the difficult times would be in this period where things are going down. But this is not correct. The difficult times actually are before growth is stopping. Think about it. For growth to stop, it means the pressures against growth have to equal the pressures in favor of growth. Otherwise, there's no equilibrium. The pressures in favor of growth are stronger now. So in a very interesting way, our leaders who keep doing things to stimulate growth are making sure that finally the negative problems are going to be bigger. They will have to be bigger to stop the growth. So now we are in this period where the problems are coming. I remember in the 90s, I looked at my computer graphs and I said, you will experience more change in the next 20 years, economic, political, environmental, psychological, than you saw in the last 100 years. And I mean, if you think back 100 years ago, Franz Joseph was your Kaiser, and you were an empire, and so forth and so on, mainly agricultural. Those changes really are smaller than what we are going to see. And you start now to see it. I didn't even know about Trump when I said this. So we are in this period, and the question which we need to think about today, will we be able to deal with this transition using democratic systems of government? That's the question. There are many different ways people can govern themselves. If you are small, which was the case for the Germanic people for many 100,000 years, you can use a tribal form of governance. With bigger groups, you need, hopefully, democracy, representative democracy. Or you can have authoritarian forms. And the authority can come from religious, like a pope, for example. From the military, for example, the Tokugawa period of Japan, the dictator had authority because of military. It can be royal, which was the case with the Habsburgs for almost 500 years. These days, authoritarianism is coming up through economic means. The large industries start to have power. Conceivably merit. The Chinese like to tell us that during periods like the Ming Dynasty, they were governed by a system where the bureaucrats were picked by merit. I'm not able to argue from firsthand if that's true or not, but it's a possibility. The basic difference, here, everybody tells a few what to do, and here, a few tell everybody else what to do. That's the very simplistic difference between authoritarianism and representation democracy. No matter what you have, you need to be able to make laws, enforce them, and arbitrate ambiguities. And that means no matter what is the system you have, usually there's something like a legislature, some executive function, and a court system. Today, Herman gave statistics about democracy. Roughly half of the people are gauged to be living in a full or a flawed democracy. I think maybe we moved down recently, but something like half. And the question, which way will the trends go in the future? We used to think everybody down here is going to move up here. Maybe it's just the opposite. We'll wait to see. Some caveats, of course. I'm simplifying a very complex issue. I'm going to assume that physical limits stop growth. I have given many lectures in Vienna trying to prove to you that that is true. But here I don't try to prove it, I just assume it. This transition will take place at different times, and it will look differently in different countries. I'm not going to get into those details. A, I don't have time. B, I don't know. Of course, I will be influenced very much by what I see happening in the United States. Although I have lived twice in Austria, and in Hungary, and in Moscow, and other places, I'm still American, and therefore fairly idiosyncratic looking at American. And of course, I don't know the answers to the questions. I do know the questions, but I don't know the answers. There are many physical limits to growth. Energy, climate change, also cultural limits, things like trust. How much do you trust another person or an institution? Growth is much easier if you have trust. Economic limits related, for example, to debt. Because I don't have much time today, I just will focus on the first, although my slides have some data on the others. Take energy. shows global discovery of oil from 1950 up until now. It's the gray. And the red line shows consumption. Back here, we were discovering big oil fields and not using them. Now here, we're consuming a lot of oil and not replacing it. We're using these discoveries. And there is no possibility that we are going to suddenly start finding big fields again, like before. So we are coming into a period where oil will be very short, and oil is crucial for many sectors of the economy, for example, transportation, processed heat, and so forth. Even in Austria, which is incredibly energy efficient with Fernwärme and so forth, nonetheless, oil depletion is extremely difficult problem. And recently, a German research center figured that by 2030, so just 15 years from now, oil production will be about half of current levels. You see it in the costs. It becomes more and more expensive to produce oil. So I always laugh when someone says, well, oil is very cheap now. It's only $50 a barrel, not 100 or 120 like it used to be. But I remember the time when it was $2 and $3 a barrel. Actually, you built this country with oil that cost $3 or $5 a barrel. You couldn't build Austria. You couldn't build the capital infrastructure with oil, which is costing $50 a barrel. And the problem is what causes growth problems. Physical growth, comes from this loop. More capital gives you more output, and some of that output is invested, and that gives you more capital. So this loop gives growth. But most of the output goes to consumer goods, that's light bulbs, houses, and so forth. It goes to obtaining more resources, like oil or food. Agriculture goes to services, hospitals. Here we are in service capital at the moment. And as these sectors take more and more of the output, less output is available to go around this loop. One habit we have is to imagine that growth is inevitable, but it isn't. Just as more capital gets more output, gets more investment, gets more capital, it would be possible less capital gives less output, gives less investment, gives even less capital in the future. This loop can go either way. Now it's under threat because the capital required to produce energy is going up. This shows so-called energy return on investment, the amount of energy which comes out of the system. In the old days, in the United States, if you put 1 barrel of oil into the system for capital and support, maybe you get something like 30 barrels out that you can use for other purposes. Now the number is down around, let's say, 12, 15, 18 barrels. Oil has to be used to extract, to refine, to transport, etc. And only after you do that, something comes out that's available for other purposes. And more is being used simply to produce energy. This is a problem because EROI for oil is relatively high. Coal is very high. If you don't protect the environment, you get almost, well, here it says 40, it can be sometimes 80. That's why China liked coal so much, is because it gave very high return. But as soon as you start to protect the environment, it comes down. Oil and gas, pretty good. But the substitutes, sorry, this is not mine. The substitutes don't even give you enough to sustain the economy. So once we are finished with coal and oil and we go over to the other petrochemicals, we aren't going to be able to sustain our current level of understanding. Now, what does this mean? Now, I'm jumping over the other limits, debt and trust and so forth, although they are very important. And I'm going to assume that these limits stop growth, as I showed in the first slide. So, what? One thing is that as you start to hit the limits, you see a set of crises. We're having crises now, in the United States. Financial crises, political crises. The interesting thing, the physical limits don't look like physical limits. They look like social, political, and psychological problems. They look like war, but the underlying factor is the physical limit. They produce crises. Crises shorten the time horizon of people. If you go to Merkel, who has 10,000 refugees trying to get into Germany, and ask her to make a 30-year plan for the future of the country, she's not interested to do it because she has to deal with short-term problems. So democracy requires that the governing capacity can look out to the end for the constructive solution of problems. And if you bring down your time horizon, you no longer do that. Climate change is an excellent example. Helga will talk more about that. Democracy doesn't look ahead 100 years, which is required to understand the climate system. When democracy works well, it is in adaptive mode. There's a problem which influences the health of the system, the employment or environmental quality or whatever. After some delay, you see this health, you compare it with what you want. There's a difference that stimulates action, which has a result, which hopefully reduces the problem. And so this is an adaptive loop. It works very well. But when crisis starts to shorten your time horizon, the system no longer is able to sustain an action to produce a health. Instead, adaptation works quite well with this kind of problem. You're here now, is this time, you want to be there later, and you have two actions, let's say, and one action makes things generally better, and one makes them generally worse. But at the next time of evaluation, which for politics is the next election, the right action looks better. So obviously the politicians are very happy to do this. But with climate change, with energy depletion, soil erosion, the problem is different. There, you have to do things which make it look worse in the short term in order to make it look better in the long term. And if this is the next election, the politicians aren't going to do that. As one politician recently said, we know what to do, but we don't know how to get reelected if we do it. When you have this problem, the system tends to shift into addictive mode. Now this is the same I showed you before, with two differences. Now you take an action and the result makes it look better, but it actually makes it worse. But there's a long delay here, and a very short delay here, so the politician can take the action, point to everybody that the health seems to be better, and be happy. Meanwhile, it's actually getting worse. President Trump is a perfect example of that. He pulls out of Paris, therefore we don't have to spend money on those measures. In the short term, the economy looks a little better, but the result is, over the long term, it's catastrophic. This is now addictive mode, and you know about it. You see it with coffee, with nicotine, credit cards, violence in personal relationships is addictive. Warfare is addictive. The problem with addiction is it drives you over into a centralized decision process. So this is really one of the biggest problems that we have to face in our governing system, is to overcome this tendency to get to good. Limits do other things. Now I'm going to go quickly. When it becomes impossible to have growth in real welfare, the powerful only get better off by taking away from those who have less power. So we see a growing gap between the rich and the poor, between the powerful and the weak. That finally causes frustration and a loss of trust. We see this in the United States. The people who trust Congress is down around 13% now. Trusting the president, trusting the legislature is going down, 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 because people see that the gap is opening and nothing has happened. When growth was possible during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the middle class could get better and better off because the rich and powerful were able to advance, generating real wealth. Now they can't. There's a process going on here which is reinforcing. As you become more powerful, you gain access to the tools which let you become even more powerful. Or as you become rich, you gain access to those things that make you even more rich. And if you become poor, you lose the power to influence the system. So this tends to spin out of control. Some statistics on income. Really, since 2000, almost everybody in the United States hasn't gotten any better off. Only the top, just the very top, top fifth, 20%, has been getting richer and richer. And this is true generally around the world. And the third one, very interesting here also in Austria, limits make it impossible in the poorer countries to advance. It generates migration. As other cultures come into your country, it reduces the ability of your country to make important decisions. Changing course requires a homogeneous value set. That means that people trust each other and that they assign importance to different things in the same way. As soon as that's not true, it becomes impossible to make big decisions, and you just lock your society into place, and it no longer can cope with problems, because no matter what you want to do, some culture will think that it's a bad idea, and they just block it. And this we see, again, in the United States. Our U.S. Congress, which is supposed to be the important rulemaking body, has not been able to do anything over the last year because of the different cultures inside the body. And for me, immigration poses this issue of diversifying culture. That's a crucial issue. It doesn't mean that you can't have immigrants, but you need to think about them in terms of your own culture. And you need to take in the immigrants in a way which bring them into your culture instead of simply creating pockets of different kinds of cultures. Now I'm going to skip ahead here. This shows you how we can tell that we are already over the limit. We published this back in 1994. How will you know when you've come past the limit? This is what we said 23 years ago. Resource stocks going down, pollution coming up, resource costs becoming greater, more and more environmental damage and cost to repair the damage from the environment. The infrastructure, roads, bridges, and electrical grid and so forth starting to deteriorate. These are the symptoms of a society which has gone past its sustainable level. Falling per capita investment in human capital means, for example, allocation to education or to health going down. And of course, rising debt. People try to sustain advances in their welfare by borrowing instead of when they're no longer able to produce it. So these are the things that we see. That is interesting data, which I'm not going to give you. So this is what we said in 1972. Notice we just said growth will end. We didn't say how. And of course, still today, I'm every morning amazed to read the paper to understand how the system is developing. People understood that. This is Sipo Mansold, who was one of the founders of the EU. He understood that you could have development instead of growth. Even an American president, Jimmy Carter, said, we don't have to have more to be better. But unfortunately, these things have been forgotten. And now you have Juncker saying, first priority policies to create growth. This is the United Nations promote growth and economic development. Even my former president was very proud about the growth he had. So we just somehow lost this understanding, and we need to bring it back. It will require more than just dropping pieces of paper into the ballot box. Democracy is much more than that. And here are some useful things to do, but I don't have much confidence in them, so I don't go into detail. I only say, if you look at this list and say that you think it could be done, for you the answer is yes. Democracy can survive with growth. If you look at this list and you say, no, it's absolutely impossible, then the answer for you is going to be no. Democracy is going to go away with growth. I hope that you decide the answer is yes. Thank you.